Why is my RC FPV drone not binding? If you are facing the frustrating issue of your remote control first-person view drone not binding, you are not alone. Many hobbyists encounter this problem, and it can stem from various factors. Let's break down the reasons and how to troubleshoot them. First, let's talk about the binding process itself. Binding is when your drone's receiver and your transmitter, or controller, establish a communication link. If this process is not done correctly, binding will fail. Make sure to follow the exact binding procedure for your specific receiver and transmitter model. For example, you may need to press and hold a bind button on the receiver before powering on the drone. Wait for the receiver light to flash, indicating it is in binding mode. Next, check if your receiver and transmitter are compatible. They must be designed to work together. For instance, a FlySky transmitter needs a FlySky receiver, while an FrSky transmitter requires an FrSky receiver. Also, ensure your flight controller supports the receiver protocol you are using, such as serial bus or digital spectrum modulation. If there is a mismatch, binding will not occur. Wiring issues can also cause binding failures. Ensure that the receiver's signal wire is connected to the correct pin on the flight controller. The ground and power connections need to be secure as well. Loose wires or incorrect connections can prevent the binding process from happening. Another important aspect is the configuration of your flight controller. If you are using software like Betaflight, you need to set it up to recognize the type of receiver you are using. Select the correct receiver protocol in the Configuration tab. If the settings are incorrect, the flight controller will not communicate with the receiver, leading to binding issues. Do not forget to check your transmitter settings. Make sure it is set to the correct model memory and protocol. Sometimes, binding fails because the transmitter is not in bind mode or is set to a different model than the one you are trying to bind. If your drone is a bind and fly model, it may come with a pre-installed receiver that might not support binding with other transmitters without modifications. For example, some DJI FPV drones requiring specific firmware and wiring. If your drone's receiver wiring is missing necessary connections, binding will fail unless you make the required modifications. Physical damage to components can also be a factor. Crashes or drops may have damaged the flight controller or receiver, which can disrupt communication. Testing with a new receiver or flight controller can help identify hardware faults. Lastly, ensure that your power supply is stable. Insufficient or unstable power to the receiver or flight controller can prevent binding. Check the battery voltage and make sure the power distribution is correct. To fix binding problems, follow these practical steps. First, ensure you are following the correct binding instructions for your transmitter and receiver. Verify all wiring connections, especially the signal wire. Configure your flight controller software to the correct receiver protocol. Make sure your transmitter is in bind mode and set to the right model. If needed, test with a known good receiver or transmitter. If you are using a DJI FPV system, confirm that your drone has the correct wiring and firmware versions. If configuration errors persist, consider resetting the flight controller settings and starting fresh. Understanding these common binding issues can help you troubleshoot your FPV drone effectively. With careful attention to compatibility, wiring, and configuration, you can resolve most binding failures and enjoy a smooth flying experience.